Good evening, Mallards. It is Friday, and this evening, Meg, Mel, Raymond, and I watched Cruella on Disney Plus because that film is now just available on Disney Plus. Raymond and Mel had already seen it, but Meg and I had not, and it was actually really fun. But I've got some opinions. Meg and I talked about it on the whole ride home, but she has now gone to sleep because it's really, really late. So instead of her beautiful and insightful film major insights, you're just stuck with me rambling. You subscribe to my channel. If you want guaranteed Megan, check out Megan Lilyflower. Instead, you just get me. So Cruella is really fun. I think that Emma Stone does a wonderful job. It is an interesting take on the character. It's kind of a fun twist. They gave it a similar treatment that they did for Maleficent, which is to be expected. This sort of, we want to see what the villains are really like and what makes the villains tick, and are they maybe not as bad as we think, which I don't necessarily think is a bad thing. And if that is something you have a problem with, you won't enjoy this film because obviously it's a huge part of it. But as long as you're willing to accept that that is where these are going and that it's going to be about telling you that the villains aren't as terrible as you think the villains are, then I think that this film in particular is a really fun ride. It certainly is visually really cool, and the fashion stuff is awesome. In particular, there's a montage where Cruella, as a fashion designer, is going against the Baroness, who is her like fashion enemy, and the montage of the statement pieces she does against the Baroness is so good. I could definitely have had a lot more of that than was contained in this film. Like a lot more. Would have enjoyed that immensely. But the main takeaway for us is that this film should have been two movies. There is a point when you're watching it where it feels like it has reached a natural end, and then a whole nother movie happens. Not quite a whole nother movie in length. It is more like 1.5 movies, but wow, could it be two with just like a couple of tweaks. So in this film, Cruella, you see her as a young girl where she's acting out, and her mother is trying to quiet her inner demons and sort of help her behave and deal with her anger issues and all that kind of stuff. And then they make a stop at Hellman Hall, which is the home of the Baroness, fashion designer. And while they're there, Cruella gets into trouble, gets chased by dogs, and the dogs chasing her end up pushing her mother off of a cliff, and her mother dies. And so she ends up in London alone, where she meets Jasper and Horace, and they sort of become a little petty crime family. But her passion had always been fashion design. And you see that throughout her montage, like when she was in school as a child, where she met Anita Darling, and just the bits that you get when they're doing petty crime. Her big thing is that she makes the outfits that they wear and their disguises. And then eventually, her Jasper helps her get a job working for the Baroness, and then she gets recognized for her talent, and like that starts to build. And then she comes to the realization that the Baroness killed her mother, and that changes how, well, she comes to the realization that the Baroness has the necklace that her mother had, and then realizes that the Baroness killed her mother. And that just becomes the focus of everything. And that arc where she is attempting to take down the Baroness and destroy her, or how the Baroness destroyed her family, has a really nice progression, includes that beautiful scene that I liked with them going against each other in the fashion show, has a nice climax with the destruction of her main big, the Baroness's like main big fashion show, while Cruella is playing two parts of Estella, which is her name, like her birth name, who's working for the Baroness, and then Cruella, the competitive fashion designer. And it sort of culminates with the destruction of the Baroness's entire like season of outfits and the destruction of her fashion show. And then it has some like final falling action where the Baroness captures Jasper and Horace and then lights fire to Cruella's workshop, essentially leaving her for dead. And that does feel like the end of the film. And then she wakes up because she's saved from the fire. And then she finds out that the Baroness is really her mother. And the person she thought was her mother just worked for the Baroness. And then there's like a whole second movie where the goal is to expose the Baroness and win control of the fortune that's rightfully hers. And she does succeed in doing that eventually, but it does feel like a separate film. There's also, during the second film, she has to win back Horace and Jasper because when she was so focused on defeating the Baroness and like was so focused on being Cruella, she became meaner to them. And so instead of being family, she was like acting like the Duchess, saying a lot of the things that the Duchess says and like being really mean. And so Meg and I discussed the fact that it clearly could have very easily been two movies. A film that ends with Cruella, with essentially with the Baroness like triumphant and Cruella in the fire. And like maybe the very ending is a hint that she's been rescued, right? And so that's the end of the film. And then the whole second film would have a longer time that it takes for her to win back Jasper and Horace because it happens real fast in the film because they still needed to get to an ending in a reasonable amount of time. And I think that that build of her winning their trust back could definitely take longer. And it would show like a different sort of growth and development for Cruella that I think would be nice. We could also get some Duchess backstory. Also, Roger and Anita are in the film, and we could get a little bit with them. But it honestly wouldn't take a lot of added stuff for it to become two films. And Meg has entire ideas of how this could work. We spent a lot of time talking about it and thinking about it, and she's right. Like, there's just so much crammed in that would just a little bit could be expanded into an amazing first film and a second film with an interesting premise and a resolution that you enjoy because it ends with Cruella like being the one who gets what she rightfully deserved. But all in all, it's still an enjoyable film. Like, it just ends up going on too long because of the pacing and because of how much they've crammed into it. But it is really enjoyable. And like I said, Emma Stone does a fantastic job. This Cruella is dynamic. She's interesting. It is strange that she was one of the like scariest and cruelest Disney villains for sure. And she's now become kind of sympathetic. And I know that a lot of people have a problem with that, but I'm not against it. I think it's fun to flip the script and give an interesting story and make characters more three-dimensional. Even if at the end of this film I am entirely unsure how she goes from that to the person who like wants the puppies for their fur, because at the end of this film she gifts Pongo and Perdita to Anita and Roger. Like, she's the one who gives them the puppies. So it is strange to think that then she'd be the one who, you know, it's like an alternate universe Cruella. She doesn't really fit in. But it is an interesting and fun story, and I think that it's a film worth watching for the fashion, for the performances, and just for the atmosphere of the whole thing is really, really fun. And the story is clever. So check out Cruella, and if you have thoughts on other ways to make it two films, or if you think that it really should just be one film and you would instead cut stuff out, I'd be interested to hear your opinions. And I'll see you tomorrow.